Hey everyone, long time no see. It's been about a month and a half. And really that's because I got appendicitis and then an appendectomy. That's really what's been going on the past month and a half in our lives. so um, that was a journey. But it did prompt me to think a lot about things I wish I would have known before I went into the Korean hospital system for a unplanned visit, as it were. So the first thing I want to start off with is a quick discussion on how insurance works in Korea, especially if you're here as a foreigner. First off, depending on the visa you have, it kind of affects the type of insurance that you might have access to. And I'm really talking about the national health insurance here. So when I was a student, at first I wasn't eligible for national health insurance because I was here just for a semester at that time. So I just used my insurance that I had through my parents at the time, which covered some international events, and the school offered some school health insurance. So depending on how long you're here, potentially as a student, that can affect, what you're looking for. Honestly, healthcare has been really affordable in Korea, and my international insurance through my parents would have been fine for an emergency, and the student health clinic honestly gave me really good care while I was here. So beyond that, with other visas, my current visa, I don't have to have national health care insurance, and my company provides me with international health insurance that's really comprehensive. Though for a lot of people, if you're here as a teacher, usually you're going to have national health insurance, but everyone has the option essentially to buy additional health insurance through a private company, and there's a lot of these around. So sometimes Korean employers will offer kind of deals they've bought into to use that. So if you're coming here through a Korean employer, definitely ask about that because it can be a really nice augment to the national health insurance. Now, national health insurance, you do have to use it in a certain way. I'm not an expert, so I'm just going to give an outline of the process. Essentially, you have to start at a clinic level and then get referred up to go to a hospital or a specialist. Though that being said, oftentimes these referrals are not a complicated process, and so I wouldn't worry too much about that. The only downside is some clinics don't have as much English capability, so it can be a little bit trickier to go through your care that way. That being said, I've been able to manage when I was a student with writing words down and just taking time. And a lot of medical professionals in Korea can speak some level of English, though it might be very specific to like medical terminology. So instead of saying, sinus infection, I might say sinitis, or that's what they might say. Small adjustments, but I've Googled as many English words as I've neighbored Korean words when I've been in doctor's offices. So that's just something to keep in mind before you go. Overall, though, I found that people are pretty patient with me when it's happening because they know that we're trying to communicate and, meet our health needs. Now, outside of clinics, I've typically used a lot of international health clinics, and those are at, medium to large hospitals usually. When we lived up in Seoul, well, actually, when I was a student, I went to the Yonsei International Health Clinic a few times when I needed it. When we were living in Seoul before, I went to the Seoul National International Clinic. And then now I go to a medium-sized hospital that's not too far from our house that has actually a pretty decent international health clinic for the size of city that it's in. And international clinics, if you're not familiar with them, essentially it's going to be some kind of staff that'll coordinate, translation, record translation for you. For my case, they can direct bill my international insurance, and they also can provide a little bit of GP services. Because in Korea, you don't quite as often have a GP just for you or a PCP just for you. And so if you're coming from an area where that's pretty common, like myself, if I don't know exactly what kind of doctor I need to meet with, the international clinic, the interpreters are mostly medical professionals themselves. They can kind of help guide that, navigate the whole see this specialist first, and we'll determine what kind of care is going to come out of that, and then we'll move on to this specialist if we still have questions. So it's great. Some of the bigger hospitals like Seoul National, they actually have GPs in-house who you can see first, and then they can refer you to all the correct departments if additional care is needed. So that's really, really great. Now, in addition to kind of unplanned visits for symptoms that come up, you can usually also plan for your yearly health checks through the international clinics at hospital. And a yearly health check in Korea is interesting because it's kind of rolling in all of your different yearly kind of appointments you would do in the States into one morning of craziness. So just to give an example of what my health check is normally like at the current hospital we go to. So each year you go in, you change, and the entire floor of the hospital is set up kind of like a factory conveyor belt. And you kind of go to each station as your name is called. So, I think for mine, it's normally something like urinalysis, blood draw, ECG, or EKG. I don't even know which one at this point. Goodness, what's next? Women's health clinic, vision, hearing, body fat analysis, and then I think an abdomen ultrasound. And so what they do is they collect all this data, and I think that took about an hour and a half. They collect all this data and then compile it, and then the international clinic will translate it and then send it to you with recommendations. So like one recommendation is something as simple as, oh, we didn't see an antibody for this vaccine. Come on your next visit and we'll just give you a booster shot. So it's really, really convenient. And if there's anything that warrants a follow-up discussion with a doctor, they'll just schedule that for you too. So it's convenient, but it is a little bit jarring if you're not used to it, especially if you're used to kind of having a back and forth with each doctor as you go. So that's a big change for a lot of people. Typically in Korea, the doctor-patient interactions are relatively short, and I would say efficient. It's not one of those, hey, let's get to know each other and chit-chat. It's like straight to the point, which if you're not used to it, it's a little jarring. Kind of take a deep breath. Make sure you come with all your questions. That's something Jiyoung helps me with a lot, because sometimes I like to kind of let the conversation prompt me to think of things. Whereas here, it's definitely, all right, I'm going to go in, I'm going to ask these questions, we need to, get this done. So it's a little bit more business-like. If it helps you, writing things down or like taking notes on your phone just so that you remember what you wanted to ask about is going to be really key. Now, I want to move on to a little bit what it's like being inpatient at a Korean hospital, because it can be a little bit different than what the States is like. One of the big things is Korean hospitals are very all-in-one. I mean, they have a lot of departments, they'll have a pharmacy on site, but they'll usually also have a convenience store in the hospital, a restaurant or two. Some of the bigger hospitals will have like whole, I don't want to say recreation area because that just sounds odd, but places for people to stay long term if they're taking care of a patient. And that's another thing. During these days, there's something called bohoja in Korea, so a patient's guardian. So we're really limited down to just one person who can see you in the hospital, and there is a bit of an expectation for a patient's guardian to do a little bit more kind of care and interaction than they might in the States. And they're usually a pull-out bed so that they can stay overnight, with the patient. So in my case, of course, Jiyoung was my guardian, and he stayed overnight with me the nights I was in hospital. But the nurses were very helpful on knowing what to do, because it can be a little hard to navigate if you ever have to act as a bohoja or as a guardian for someone, or if you are a patient and you have a friend coming in to help take care of you. It's as simple as, helping people get in and out of bed, raising and lowering kind of the bed rails, taking their food tray back to the whole food tray drop-off area after meals, and that kind of thing. So it's been kind of interesting to see, the experience. Not as fun as you'd imagine as the patient, but I found that the nurses were really, really good about answering questions, and even if the doctor visits are relatively short, nurses were good about either answering basic questions, or they could just call up to the doctor's office and get that answer for you really quick. So overall, I hope that none of you have to visit a hospital for any reason in Korea, but if you do, just do like a normal health check. Go through an international office if you can, ask a lot of questions, and if you ever end up having to go to hospital, even if you don't speak Korean, lean on the international office if you need it. But also, most of the nurses I chit-chatted with, they could speak basic English, which was great, because my Korean, when I'm right after surgery, is not quite up to snuff as it normally is. So that was really, really, really helpful. So hopefully this has shed a little bit of light into how the Korean medical system works. I hope it makes people feel a little less stressed about potentially doing even normal checkups, because of all times, this is the time to take care of our health. So everyone hang in there, stay healthy, and I'll see you guys next time.